My name is Cullen Marutzky, and I'm a pharmacist and part owner of a new pharmacy called CaptureLab RX.
What brought you into the pharmacy world, and then specifically for wildlife?
One of my first core memories is being on the back of a horse with my dad, going up some mountain trail and listening to elk bugle and mule deer and bears. And so with those core memories, that sticks with you. In undergraduate, I got a job at an oral surgeon's office as a surgical assistant. That's where I got my first introduction to the wonders of modern pharmacology.
So the end user, are they able to go directly to you?
If an end user comes directly to the pharmacy and says, I would like a prescription, we can't just issue that.
In general, it is just not worth it. There's no sable, there's no whitetail, there's no anything worth not playing by the rules.
To be honest with you, in an ideal world, they would just develop a whole other set of rules for our veterinary industry that makes sense.
I'm sure most of the people I know use it fairly quickly, but what is a shelf life?
If I made it before November of 2023, I could put 365 days. If I made it after, it's magically now 60. If a viewer got nothing from me other than maybe this and a few other things, it would be golden.
Before we dive into this week's podcast, I just wanted to pause and say thank you to Callan Arns with Arns Ranch and Wildlife. We are actively trying to continue to push out these podcasts and bring more value to this industry. And we don't have a ton of statistics yet, but we are so thankful for people like Callan who not only believe in the podcast, but believes in us at Droptine Studios. So Callan, thank you. And to anyone listening to this, we're going to link Callan's website description below, and please go visit his websites. This week I saw he was catching sable, nilgai. He runs cattle operations. He does literally everything to help bring up ranch owners' profit margins. So go to his website. Thank you, Callan, for doing this, and we are actively trying to look for new sponsors to be able to help us do this. We're not trying to get rich off doing this. We're just literally trying to cover our time, but this is labor intensive. So as you enjoy this podcast, go visit his website and consider sponsoring the Droptine Studios podcast. Thank you. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. By the time you've watched this, EWA, or the Exotic Wildlife Association, has already passed. But right before that, we wanted to have our buddy Cullen come on with CaptureLab RX. Cullen, if you'll introduce yourself. First off, say how you say your last name. And if you wouldn't mind telling people what CaptureLab is.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Cullen Marutzky, and I'm a pharmacist and part owner of a new pharmacy called CaptureLab RX. The other owner, his name is Dan Hagerman. He and I have worked together for a really long time, and really excited to kind of bring this new pharmacy to the industry. Technically, CaptureLab is a new pharmacy, but Dan and I have been in this industry since I graduated pharmacy school in 2015. So we've been doing it a while and excited to be on this journey doing our own thing.
What brought you into the pharmacy world, and then specifically for wildlife?
Yeah, great question. So I would imagine the journey to wildlife is probably similar for a lot of us in this industry. You grow up hunting, fishing, in the outdoors. You know, it's a huge part of what you do. And from the time I was just a little guy, one of my first core memories is being on the back of a horse with my dad, going up some mountain trail and listening to elk bugle and mule deer and bears. And so with those core memories, that sticks with you. And I think that's kind of where my spark for the love of wildlife came. When we talk about the pharmacy journey, it was pretty interesting. In undergraduate, I got a job at an oral surgeon's office as a surgical assistant, right? Kind of a weird job for an undergraduate. But that's where I got my first introduction to the wonders of modern pharmacology. He would perform general anesthesia right there in the office. And so you get to see that firsthand. And, antibiotics, some other medications, that takes a while to see those effects, right? Anesthesia meds, it's happening within seconds. And so to see that, it was fascinating for me. And that's where my interest in pharmacy happened. I knew that I wanted to apply to pharmacy school. And I thought, well, if I get in, great. If I don't, I'll go be a welder with my dad and we'll have a different journey. And ultimately, I got accepted to school. And of the schools, University of Wyoming was definitely the best fit. It's a small town, smaller school, more intimate type setting. And it didn't hurt that the Elkwoods were 25 miles from campus. My family would tease me quite a bit that I was a pharmacy student with a very serious elk hunting problem. And my retort was usually, well, you know what, I still do pretty good in school and I keep the freezer full. So
Yeah.
I keep a nice, work-life balance.
Yeah.
And then during pharmacy school, I figured out really quick that compounding was for me. I've kind of already alluded, my dad was a welder and a mechanic most of his life, and I had kind of two influences growing up. One was very focused towards higher education, the other building things, working with your hands, doing that kind of thing. And, I spent countless hours in a welding shop working with my dad. So when you combined pharmacy and compounding, it was kind of melding both of those worlds together. So I knew compounding was it for me right away in pharmacy school. And in your fourth year, you spend an entire year basically going around the community. You work in different pharmacies and get to experience different types of pharmacy to see what you like. And I had a sterile compounding rotation set up. And 2 weeks before I was supposed to go on that rotation, the preceptor or the host for that retired. So no more compounding rotation. And, sitting here talking to you about this and reflecting, you really have to have faith in God's plan for you, because you never know what opportunity is going to be closed and what opportunity is going to open.
Right.
And so I was pretty devastated that was canceled. And a professor that I was working with, she called in a few favors. She talked to a local pharmacy that did compounding and typically didn't take students, but they were willing to make an exception. And I had no idea that what I was about to walk into was going to pretty much change my career path or change my life forever. So I walked into this pharmacy, it's my first day, and she says, well, we have actually two types of pharmacies here in our building. We have a home infusion pharmacy where we do human medications. And then we have this new kind of rapidly growing veterinary pharmacy called Zopharm, and they're owned by Wildlife Pharmaceuticals. Would you be interested in spending time there? And I said, oh, absolutely. And she said, well, what they specialize in is sterile compounds that are chemical immobilization drugs or anesthesia drugs for wildlife. And I'm sure my jaw hit the ground. Like this lady just explained my perfect job. I didn't even know it existed until she described it to me. So I went home that first night and I told my wife, I said, I just found my dream job. I'm going to work really hard. This is what I want to do. And that internship turned into a paid internship that then turned into a full-time pharmacy job. And I kind of found my role as the lead compounding pharmacist there, and did that for the better part of 10 years.
Man. So another thing that you mentioned was you went to school in Wyoming, and I'm sure most of our listeners are from Texas. So is that where you're based out of?
Yep. So we're in Laramie, Wyoming. And in fact, if you, as the crow flies from where the old Zopharm building is, we're probably about 5 miles away.
Awesome.
So, yeah. And to be honest with you, that whole Zopharm experience was an absolute blessing. I didn't realize it when I was walking in the door, but I'm a little biased, right? Mm-hmm. But I was walking into the premier pharmacy in that space. The owner and founder of the company had developed some compounded products that absolutely revolutionized how we immobilize wildlife. And so what a place to cut your teeth as a new pharmacist that's interested in this avenue. Made phenomenal relationships. So the other half to Capture Lab, Dan Hagerman, he was the pharmacist in charge at Zopharm. And, he and I had a working relationship for probably, it's going on 14 or 15 years now. And as the pharmacist in charge, you literally oversee every single detail of that pharmacy. And when an inspector walks in, you're kind of the man in charge. You're the one that has to be the face for the pharmacy. And so I will brag on Dan a little bit because he's kind of too humble to do so, but he's a regulatory genius. And so that's kind of the magic of our partnership, is that, we'll get to talking about the regulatory side of things, and it's always a challenge. And his ability to kind of navigate that and always adapt has been crucial to the success of our pharmacy.
Yeah. So I'm sure most of the people listening know what a pharmacy is in the wildlife industry, but for anyone who may not know or has maybe listened to the podcast, how would you explain what Capture Lab is to someone but they've never worked with a wildlife pharmacy before?
Yeah. So at its core, any pharmacy is going to be very similar to one another. That's by design because regulatory requirements have it that way. But then you get specialty pharmacies like compounding, and then we further specialize in sterile products, and then we further specialize in wildlife medications. And our biggest focus is those chemical immobilization drugs. So we basically start with a raw powder and raw ingredients. And by the time we're done, it's in solution, an injectable solution. We sterilize it, and then it's in its individual units and is dispensed to clients. So from the day-to-day aspects of, dispensing prescriptions, getting prescriptions from veterinarians, that's very similar to any other typical pharmacy as far as an outline. It's when we get into the specialty side of things, of specifically the drugs we work with, the ability to get them at a very high concentration. And then obviously our patients are four-legged and furry. So
right. Yeah, my doctor said that about me, but I started having to walk. So on your website, I was going through it, so I'm going to read it so I don't misquote anything, but it says your mission statement talks about product innovation, compounding quality, customer service for wildlife and exotics. So what does that look like in a day-to-day at your lab?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest with you, those are the pillars of our pharmacy. So, breaking it down, if we look at the customer service side, that's probably, at least at this point, one of the biggest ones for us. To be honest with you, the way I was taught a long time ago, when we approach customer service, we're treating our customers like they are friends, family, neighbors, right? And if you have that mindset going into pretty much any situation when you're thinking about your customer, everything else just falls into place, and it's the way that it really should be.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I'll tell you a story. So over the course of as many years as we've been doing this, you develop relationships with clients. Sometimes it grows to a friendship outside of work. Right. And we have that with several of our clients. And I've been bugging one of them for years, long before we ever started this pharmacy. I said, why don't you come up and go hunting with me? Let's go do something fun. And he was always super busy. But this last fall, he was able to come up and we went on an elk hunt. And that's a whole nother story, a whole nother podcast. It was a phenomenal time, right? But in that process, before he got here, some of these people's names, they're household names in our family, even though my wife hasn't ever met them or my kids haven't ever met them. When they ask about my day, that's a huge part of my day. Right. So they'd heard about this person. They knew all about him. And before he got there, I warned him, my little 3-year-old girl, she's got a little bit of the stranger danger. She's a little shy. And I said, don't be surprised if it takes her a day or two to even say hi to you. That's how shy she is. 15 minutes into him being there, she had him by the hand and was showing him her toys, showing him the house. And by the time he left, that man was just a part of our family. And that's just the way it will be forever now. Right. And obviously that's an extreme end to the spectrum, but at its foundation, that's the level of kind of customer service and interactions and relationships we try to build with our clients. Right. Going into further, if you talk about day-to-day aspects. So if I think about, you get a prescription, you call the pharmacy, there's a 100% chance at some point in that conversation, you are going to either talk to Dan or myself, the two owners of the company, so that we can start to develop that relationship. You can see that there's, an ownership taken, we're focusing on you as the client. We'll talk to you about products. We'll talk to you about the pharmacy. We'll answer whatever questions you have so that you feel comfortable when you get that product in the mail, that you know how to use it, at least from a pharmacy perspective. And it's adaptable. So we have people that are super busy. If they want to call and talk for 2 minutes because they've got something going on the ranch, we adapt to that. If they want to talk for 30 minutes because they have lots of questions, we will adapt to that. And then further in the process, so as your prescription gets ready to go, we'll print out a shipping label, and either Dan or I will send you a message with your shipping information with instructions on how to get a hold of us after hours if you have any questions, comments, concerns, and you get Dan or I's direct contact information. So if you have a problem on Saturday and you can't remember, hey, Cullen, I don't remember what does this Atipamazole do? I will answer and I will help you through it. So the customer service doesn't just stop when the prescription is dispensed. It's long after, for as long as you need our help. Right. There's a lot of other kind of little day-to-day details that we do to try to help our customers out. One of the biggest things is, for many years, we were just kind of the pharmacist behind the scenes, and nobody really knows about the pharmacy or the pharmacist, and we wanted to change that. So one way to do that is to better relate to our clients. And one of the things for us that we wanted to accomplish was, we don't want to just be the pharmacists that don't utilize the drugs. We want to get out in the field, boots on the ground, and be out there on captures, learn, gather perspective from the end user to know some of their challenges, and then can I bring that back to the pharmacy and maybe help them in some way?
Right.
And so first thing we did, we took a capture course. So we took a chemical immobilization course. It's put on by a company called Global Wildlife Resources. He's been doing it for 30 years. His specialty is definitely in kind of the North American native species like elk, deer, black bears, mountain lions. And he teaches courses, everything from researchers to veterinarians, biologists. And it turned out so well. So he does an online course that you can do at your own pace, or he does a live course.
Let you bring your own drugs and be like,
yeah,
I can bring my own. So
to be honest with you, like as a side note, yes, from right now, the way he talks, he's solely just uses our product when he does the live course. That's a 3-day course. And that's what we took was, so you spend 2 days in this, like a academic setting. And then the third day, because it's hard to, get animals in a kind of a closed or controlled setting, we do domestic goats. And so you actually immobilize a domestic goat and you learn TPR, so temperature, pulse, respiration, all of those types of things, and get to put hands on an animal and learn all of that. So it was such a good experience that we decided we were going to host this every year. So he does them all across the country. I think he's got one like in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But every year in June, we do one at Capture Lab in Laramie. And people come from all over the country to participate.
Man, y'all should do one at like EWA next time in August or something.
Yeah, I'll tell you, not to put the cart before the horse, but we have some ideas with this educational piece and trying to bring information to our industry that, we'll see how the next 6 months go, but we have some ideas kind of in that type of realm of furthering that education piece and doing our part as a pharmacy and trying to facilitate that in any way we can.
Yeah, because that's another part. Like, I know this is probably a bad way to compare it, but it's encouraging to hear that you're actually taking courses to learn how to do it. Because like the people who made I think it's a Chevy truck bed where it folds down. Well, they've never pulled a trailer because the hitch never comes off my truck. So when you pull it down and it puts a hole in the bed of the truck, it's like the guy who made this has never driven a truck in his life. Yeah, it's a good idea and concept. It looks good on paper, but until you pull a trailer. So it's nice to know that the people using or actually creating and compounding these drugs that people are using are actually learning how to do it. And I think that's going to benefit y'all as a company just because you are getting boots on the ground and learning like, hey, I'm not just some smart guy that can mix this stuff together. I'm actually going out there doing it.
100%. And I can think of the first kind of major capture I went on. A friend of mine invited me to come down. He says, well, we're going to be around Lubbock, and that's about as far north and as close to Laramie as we're ever going to get. So here's your chance, come down. And I really didn't know what I was getting into. I knew we were going to catch a handful of animals, and I show up and we do a tour of the ranch and I get to see these beautiful animals. And I start hearing him talk about a capture or a helicopter crew. I go, what, a helicopter crew? He goes, yeah, you ready to get in it? I go, man, I've never been in a helicopter. I don't know. He goes, you used to race dirt bikes. You'll be fine. Get in it. You'll be good. I said, well, I don't want to be the new guy that throws up in the guy's helicopter. And he goes, you'll be okay. You just warn him ahead of time. And so
he'll tilt it on the side and let you just
yeah. And Dr. Sam was there, and he said, just eat a light breakfast and you'll be fine. I got to sit right behind him as we were out there, and he's darting these animals. And one of the things I took back, because we're up in that helicopter and we're hovering, right? And we talk a lot, and we can talk about this more, but one of the things that we hit on is time to when they're recumbent, when an animal actually lays down.
Right.
Another big part of that is time to first effect, so that they're not running all over the pasture. Because where we were at was thick, right? And if we weren't up in that helicopter being able to watch them, we'd had no idea where that animal went over the course of the time it took before it finally laid down. Right. So yeah, you take things like that, you bring them back to the pharmacy and you work on it, and you continue to kind of hone that edge and see if there's ways from a pharmaceutical standpoint we can help out some of those challenges.
Yeah. No, it's like I said, it's encouraging because I think that's what we've done so well with our industries. We go to so many places and help so many businesses, but I try to put my money where my mouth is. I don't just do paid ads for people. We pay ads, and I'm learning, but I'm doing it to be able to refine our services for our customers. So it's really encouraging to hear. But you're talking about, that's one thing you do, but are y'all just a compounding service, or do y'all do other services within your business as well? Yeah,
to be honest with you, right now, we're still so new. It's all about the drugs. That's our bread and butter. We're a pharmacy, but when we talk about the potential for education, we talk about the potential for problem solving. There's a lot of little ideas that we have, but right now our main focus is definitely the drugs and the pharmacy.
So mentioning of the drugs, y'all have a new product that you were telling me about, right? It's the cap kits. So can you kind of walk me through what that is and what problems does it solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So our cap kit, and we call it CAP, short for a capture kit. It is a combination. So if you look at most immobilization drugs, there's kind of the big six that I think of. You have butorphanol, medetomidine, azapirone, midazolam, ketamine, and then there's a manufactured drug called tilazol. So many, if you look at all the different compounds out there and the variations of them, they're for the most part a variation of those main drugs. And our cap kit is a combination of butorphanol, medetomidine, and azapirone, and it's highly concentrated. And I think that's kind of what maybe makes ours not necessarily super different from other compounds, but that's our niche, is to make things very, very concentrated. And so with that, you also get the reversal medications. And when we talk about, and we'll get more into this, I think, later in some of the questions, but atipamezole reverses medetomidine, and it has to be done so in a very specific ratio. And so you can figure that out by doing math, or you can follow a chart and know how many mils to give. But we've designed that in the concentration of atipamezole. So we've made it so concentrated that when you give 1 mil of cap, you just give 2 mils of atipamezole. It's very straightforward. You don't have to really do any calculations.
Just double it.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, for the most part, if you look at atipamezole, I'm not sure there's very many options out there that are more concentrated than, we'll say, 40 mg per mil. So 40 milligrams for every mil of liquid. We get ours to a 60 mg per mil. And so it's super concentrated, which allows for that easy reversal ratio.
Nice.
And then with that, with the whole kit, you also get naltrexone, which is another reversal drug. And we're almost ready to release an all-in-one reversal, where the two reversal drugs are combined, which historically, drugs like atipamezole, they don't go into solution well. And they can actually come out of solution if you mix them too much or manipulate them too much. So historically, we never really recommended combining naltrexone and atipamezole, but we figured out a compounding process where they are compatible and they're at those right concentrations so that you maintain that same 2-to-1 reversal ratio. And if you're the type of guy that likes to just reverse all of the drug, this all-in-one is very easy. You're not drawing up two separate ones and then mixing them up and accidentally giving the wrong one. It's all just in one bottle, one syringe, and pretty easy to use.
Really? Mm-hmm. So when you get your cap kit, is it just one kit? Everything's in there, like you mentioned, because I didn't know the reversal was in it as well. So from unboxing the package, what all do you get? Yeah.
So we offer individual options. So we've designed in the process, you get extra atipamezole. We want that because if you run out of the knockdown portion, your day's done you're done capturing for the day. If you run out of reversal and you've got an animal down, that's an emergency.
Right.
So we always try to make it so that you have extra of the reversal. So over time, if you start accumulating, extra reversal vials, we do sell things as individual vials, but as a kit, we actually have designed, instead of getting it just like as vials in a Ziploc baggie or however it's dispensed, we have a custom-made box that is foam inserts, and there's a spot for each individual vial. And it's about the size of, 300 Win Mag ammo box is basically the size of it. And your kit will come in that. It's all labeled on the inside. When you open it up, it'll tell you what's in the kit, and some basic reversal instructions and those types of things. So that's where we looked at that and said, hey, these are really expensive drugs. They're very important. They need protected. What's an extra thing we can do for our clients to see if, make it a little nicer. So it's good for storage, it's good for organization, and it protects the drug.
And then what would the shelf life be on something like that? I'm sure most of the people I know use it fairly quickly, but what is a shelf life on a cap kit? That's a really good question.
It's a question we have been getting a lot for the last 2 years. So from a regulatory standpoint, a lot of things have changed in 2023.
Right.
Basically, historically, so I'll talk pre-2023, and not every pharmacy kind of chose to do these things, but in general, if a pharmacy wanted to, they could do third-party studies, basically, to look at the stability, sterility, and potency of a drug over time. And if you did those studies, you could potentially have a beyond use date. So expiration date is kind of for a manufactured item. Beyond use date that's the term we use for compounded products. You could put up to a year's worth of beyond use date. For an unpunctured, vial on the shelf, you could put up to a year. In November of 2023, the powers that be decided, you know what, we don't like that anymore. Even though you have the studies and the science to prove that that's okay, we're going to say, nope, depending on, and this again there's some variations there, but depending on your storage requirements, we're going to cut you from 365 days to 60 days. And the question I would get a lot is, well, wait a minute, what did you do about did you change the product? Did you change the way it was compounded? And to be honest, I have to be honest with them and say, no, it's the same compounding process. If I made it before November of 2023, I could put 365 days. If I made it after, it's magically now 60.
Well, I don't know who you're talking about, but that sounds like the government. It just sounds like we have facts and statistics, and we're going to do the opposite of what it says.
Yeah, and the tough part from like our perspective as a pharmacy is we have science. We have an unbiased, analytical company that takes our product. They don't have any, stake in the game, and they will test it for a year and then put it, they do the whole year gamut, and they'll say, oh, yep, it's still potent, it's still sterile, it's, maintains all of those requirements over that period of time. That's science. You can't really refute that. But, there's arguments from kind of the government's perspective that, well, you can't guarantee that every single unit you put out, you're not testing every unit. But in all reality, yeah, that's a tough conversation to have with a client, especially like a historic one. Now, as a pharmacy and as a pharmacist, I'm bound to those rules and regulations. So when you get a product from us, it will be labeled as such. And I can never say, yep, absolutely, go ahead and use that product. But,
But Austin can. So if you want to use that for, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So, at that point, one of the things I always say, no matter what product, whether it's a manufactured product, whether it's a compounded product, I don't care where it comes from, inspect the vial before you use it every time. Look for things like precipitation. So I'm talking when, if you look in the vial and there's little crystals floating around, or if when you got the vial brand new, it was crystal clear and looked like water, and now it's, looks like yellow and it's discolored. Those are signs that something is going on in that vial that shouldn't be. And that's regardless whether it's 1 day old or 100 days old. You can do a lot of things where you're inspecting the vial prior to use every time.
Well, and that's one of the questions I want to ask, going back to when these drugs go bad or the best buy date, like food, right? Most of the time that you have the best buy date with food is because it's going to go rotten and it's no longer good for you, has no nutritional value, or is going to make you sick. With drugs, what is the problem? Is it just that it's no longer potent, so it becomes just like a Visine to them? Is that essentially the layman's term of?
Yeah. So we worry about a couple things. So we worry about sterility over time, because again, these are sterile products. They're injected right into the muscle, and so if there's bacteria in there, the chance of infection gets exponential. And then obviously the other thing is potency. So that's the hard part. That's why we would do those studies 5-10 years ago to prove that over time, and then they do what's actually called a forced degradation study. So they will put it in extreme environments. They'll put it to high temperatures. They'll put direct UV light. They'll do all kinds of things to give it more stress than what it would ever get in somebody safe for a year. And that's kind of the science behind it. But that's their worry. That's their question is, well, what happens to every single one of those vials? Does it lose potency? Does it lose sterility? And then when you puncture the vial, now all bets are off, because you may have really good technique. You may take an alcohol swab and wipe the top of the stopper every time and use perfect technique. But what happens if you drop it in the mud, but you've got an emergency and you need to draw drug out? So once you puncture it, it's really hard to guarantee things like sterility and that type of thing. So all of those studies were on an unpunctured vial, but in an essence, you worry about oxidation. Light exposure can degrade the drugs. Temperature extremes, depending on the drug, can have effects on it. So there's
that anybody would, but like keeping it stored in your truck or anything like that. Like things you should not do.
Right.
Needs to be locked behind a safe. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense as far as like why putting it through those extreme tests is because that's what theoretically there's a bad batch or a bad apple in every batch, and that's kind of what it does. Is if you keep it in the glove department of your truck, it's going to go bad. Yep.
And that's kind of their justification. If you talk to someone about it, why we went from 365 to like 60 days, they feel like under almost the worst conditions of a typical sterile compounding pharmacy, if you were to introduce the tiniest amount of bacteria in there, they feel like 60 days is kind of the mark for still being safe.
Well, if, in my opinion, which means nothing, but like if you're doing this as a business and you're running animals and you're actually running a farm or a ranch. Most of the stuff shouldn't last that long. Like, you shouldn't just have a hoarder's nest of compounded drugs in your safe. Like, you need to use it and then move on from it.
Correct. Yeah. And to be honest with you, there's even some, again, push from a regulatory standpoint to make sure that we're not dispensing in excess and those types of things, and that what we're dispensing is, adequate for what it's being used for.
And so we talked before, and this isn't even on the questions, but like we talked beforehand of like, what is the holy trinity, if you will, of relationship with pharmacist, vet, and end user? How should that work in this process?
Yeah. So, whether we're talking regulatory issues, pharmacy issues, whatever it may be, if a viewer got nothing from me other than maybe this and a few other things, it would be golden.
Today's episode is brought to you by Arns Ranch and Wildlife. If you're looking for someone to manage your land, bring up your profit margin, or just take things off your plate, I personally recommend Cullen Arns with Arns Ranch and Wildlife. Visit their website or contact Cullen today. As you know, and as you've probably heard if you were listening to all of our podcasts, the more influence we have on these platforms, the more guests we can have. So I'm asking you, please comment below. Literally pause and go comment. You could comment whatever you want. But comment, share this. If you text it to your friends, your family, whatever it would be. I know I sound like an influencer, and I will always say that because I feel stupid asking. But please like, subscribe, share, comment, whatever you need to do. It's going to help boost our algorithm. It's going to help boost our numbers. And again, thank you for watching the Droptine Studios podcast.
Issues, pharmacy issues, whatever it may be, if a viewer got nothing from me other than maybe this and a few other things, it would be golden.
This would be a good time for an ad, Daniel.
Yeah. So we have to see moving forward the acquisition and utilization of prescription products as a teamed effort. And what I mean by that, and again, that's just my opinion, is that you got three people on this team. You have the end user or the producer, right? The person utilizing the drugs on their animals. You have the pharmacy that's compounding them and dispensing them. And then you have the veterinarian that's, developing that patient-client relationship, deciding what the appropriate treatment plan is, and then writing that prescription. And if those three entities are always communicating and always working together, that to me is the easiest path forward. Now, whatever that path may be, we'll still figure that out. But the ability to adapt and accommodate and make sure that there's always light at the end of the tunnel and we have a positive path forward, to me, that's how we accomplish that.
And so with that, I want to ask the question. It may seem rudimentary, but I want to make sure we cover all the bases, if you will. Mm-hmm. So the end user, are they able to go directly to you? Like if XYZ Ranch just calls you up and says, hey, I need this. Or do they have to have a script from a veterinarian to get something from you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So to be honest with you, it can happen both ways. Now, if an end user comes directly to the pharmacy and says, I would like a prescription, we can't just issue that, right? At that point, we would make either, if it's a refill, we'd send a refill request to the doctor or the veterinarian, or oftentimes we can call and say, hey, doctor, I just spoke to so-and-so at this ranch. They're looking for a refill. Do you authorize that? And depending on, again, the relationship and whatever that veterinarian has established with the client, sometimes they'll say, oh, you know what, I'm going to have to call you back. I got to figure out what they're utilizing it for. Or, whatever that may be, they develop that, they further that relationship, and then he calls back and we do the prescription. So ultimately, when you think about it, no matter how you skin it, the veterinarian is the start of the prescription and acquiring those and that's the same whether it's a controlled substance, whether it's a non-controlled substance. If it's a prescription product,
right,
you have to have a prescription for it.
Yeah, because I'm sure. Did you sit in last year, or maybe it was August when EWA had the panel?
Yep.
There was a couple of people that kept asking the same song and dance, and I know what they were trying to get at, but I just wanted to hit them on the head to be like, they're trying to say you need to talk to the pharmacist and you need to talk to your vet always, point blank period. And I just don't know why it wasn't getting through their head, but that's why I wanted to cover the bases. Is people just have to understand that this is a marriage. It's can't be done any which way but, and it's the law, and you have to be able to have that. So I'm really interested to see what this panel this weekend, since we're doing this right before EWA, but I think I've said it with Cullen's podcast, it's going to be standing room only because so many people have so many questions. So I'm very thankful that you're here. Hopefully we can make some questions and where people can take screen recordings and show people, but hopefully we can answer some of those questions. But Yeah, I think that people just have to get it through their head. You have to have a relationship across the board with your pharmacist and your veterinarian.
Right. And the important part about that a lot of people maybe don't kind of understand, the regulatory side of things is immense. I mean, so I mentioned Dan is our pharmacist in charge. That is like 90% of his day-to-day is keeping on top of all of those regulatory requirements. I mean, you got to think right now we're licensed in, 5 or 6 states. By this time next year, we hope to be licensed in 24 states. So we have to keep track of every individual state's requirements. We have to keep track of the DEA requirements. And as they change, we have to be on top of that. So I would argue that your PIC, typically in most pharmacies, probably knows the law better than the inspectors that are walking in to inspect you.
Right.
And so if you have questions, there's so many variables, right? And we can talk about the basics here, but that's again why I talk about, suggest the communication piece, because if you have a unique situation, call your pharmacy, let them give them the situation, and they'll tell you, well, legally, this is how I'm allowed to dispense the medication that in a way that best suits your needs. Or, man, the way you want to use that, I probably can't prescribe it or dispense it in that manner.
Right.
So again, that's that communication piece, because it is so complicated. And if I was, in the shoes of an end user, I would say to myself, wow, this is overwhelming. Well, the good part is, what do we do with a team? A good team utilizes its members to their strengths, right? So you have a pharmacy that is required to be experts in that
quite
realm.
Literally your job.
Right. And then you have a veterinarian that's the same in their field. And then you have the knowledge and expertise of your own operation. And so together, you utilize the team to its strengths and we move forward.
Right. So with that, what all projects are y'all working on to go through with safety, efficiency, or what kind of research are y'all doing, and why is it important to do that research?
Yeah, so research is probably one of my favorite parts. I always joke that, I became a pharmacist, but in another life, I probably should have been a deer farmer or worked on an exotic ranch, because I absolutely love it. So we take advantage of any chance we can to get out in the field, and a big part of that is research. We are incredibly blessed with the people that have shown interest in doing research with us. In fact, we have one of our team members of Capture Lab. His name's Chase Nunez. He's got his PhD, graduated from Texas A&M, and with Dr. Cook, and while he was there, they did a ton of research on immobilization drugs. And so he's been able to really facilitate that for us in a lot of avenues to start research. And our goal is to have some sort of published study or case study or something that is scientific based for just about every species that you could potentially use our drug on. It's a lofty goal, and it's going to take a while, but that's something we're just going to continually work on. We have, like in Laramie, of all places, we're conveniently located between 2 of the major wildlife research facilities in the Rocky Mountain region. I tease the team that's in Wyoming that, if I didn't have a regular day job, I'd be bugging you guys all the time. So we've got a mule deer study going there. And then there's a couple other veterinarians and state agencies that have looked at elk, deer. There's a big black bear study that we're getting ready to work on. So to me, the idea is when we do all of this research and we do all this studies, it's helping legitimize what we're doing, right? Because if someone from the outside looking in at our kind of microcosm, what are you guys doing with these drugs and these animals? Well, here's some science-based things that are coming out of this. We're not just willy-nilly going about it. We have research to support what we're doing. And I think it helps legitimize things. It also helps that, at that same panel, they discussed that there might be 5 or 6 veterinarians in the state of Texas that really, really are comfortable with and fully understand all the intricacies for different species, right? So if you're a veterinarian that does it a little bit, but you're getting ready to go out and dart a $50,000 sable, right? You want to make sure everything is up to board. And in the world of whether it's veterinary medicine or human medicine, there's a definite trend that we want to be able to back up what we're doing with either some sort of protocol or some sort of scientific study. So if we have a study on sable and we can say, well, 30 sable of varying sizes and genders and age were all darted with these dosages, and these were the temperature, pulse, respiration, so physiological data. It's a place for a veterinarian to start that may not have the 30 years of expertise that other veterinarians have had. So I think there's a lot of benefits from research.
Yeah, I think it's literally, why has our podcast done so well? I don't know. But I think having guests like you and doing it, but it just shows our industry is so hungry for that knowledge. And instead of just some ignorant person coming off the street going, well, you're a drug dealer. And it's like, well, kind of, but I'm also a conservationist trying to better the industry and better these species. And so how much would you say of your business is innovation versus like trying to come up with something new or refining what you're already doing?
Yeah. So right now I would say probably 50-50. We have a huge whiteboard at the pharmacy. We either call it our war room or our brainstorming corner. And on that board, there's maybe a half a dozen ideas. Some of them small, but some of them, if we can bring to fruition, I feel like it has the potential to have a massive impact on how we immobilize wildlife. Those are dreams, right? Those are things we're working towards. And then, so that's kind of the big innovation piece, really coming out of left field with something brand new. The other aspect would be, again, refining, honing our tools, sharpening our tools, and finding little ways that we can kind of make a difference or improve on things. So I would say it's kind of 50-50. Once we kind of get our feet underneath us, we're going to start pushing pretty heavy towards that whiteboard,
right?
Because there's some really amazing things on the whiteboard.
Well, is there any of them that you can touch on, or is there just something for later? Another podcast once it come out?
Yeah, probably another podcast. When we get to the point where we are like solid, then we'll do another podcast on those.
Perfect. So then I'll kind of move into some of the more common things. So what are the most used, a whole bunch of big words that I can't say or spell earlier, but what are the most commonly used immobilization drugs in the wildlife industry?
Yeah. So,
and do they have a nickname that I can say?
Yeah, there you go. Everyone's got an acronym or a nickname. So if you look at the individual agents, I would say from a pharmacy perspective, you probably have like 5 or 6. So you have butorphanol, medetomidine, azapirone, midazolam, ketamine, and then there's a manufactured version called tilazol. So if you take kind of those 5, right, combining them in different concentrations, different ways, that's kind of the from a compounding perspective, how we do it. And each drug has a purpose, right? And so finding that just perfect combination is always that's the carrot in front that we're always striving for, to see if we can come up with a perfect combination. And it's not always just, for a long time we had maybe 1 or 2 combos, and what we're finding is we're refining that more and combining these 3 drugs for this species and these 4 drugs for this species, and providing more options and really tailoring it to the specific animal.
So are you having just like field testers essentially? It's like, hey, I'm willing to try this new drug on my bongo, or how does that work?
Yeah. So a lot of that is research, right? But the hard part is, it's scary. I mean, if I was in a end user's shoes and some pharmacy came to me and said, hey, I've got this new great combo, I think it's going to work great, let's go try it on your animals. Well, I've got over $1 million worth of inventory out there. I don't want you, just slinging darts with your drugs. So that is a challenge, right? But we do it through those research steps. We do it as you can't call it a controlled environment because it's not in any way, shape, or form. But we've got a team and staff members that go out that observe. Vet students come out and participate in the research. So that's one avenue. We do have some end users. I will tell you, if I could hug them right now, I would. I have one guy that sends me a monthly email with all the animals he's used our drugs on, with a full report, talks about dosing and how well the drug performed and how it was breathing and all of those things. And then his own little personal comments about it. Then another end user, he and I talk probably 3 or 4 times a week. And I told him, I go, this is my sign that I'm becoming obsessed with this, because my highlight of the weekend now is for you to call me on Saturday evening to let me know how your kudu capture went. And so, yes, we're very blessed with some people that are excited about what we're doing, wanting to participate, and they're making a huge difference, because somebody has to kind of be willing to take that leap, right? And we're not completely reinventing the wheel with a lot of these combinations. They're drugs that we have been using for years, just in different strengths or different ratios and those types of things. So it's not a huge risk, but it's still, they got to be willing to take that step, and I'm very blessed for those people.
Well, and that's the other side, is like, you're not like, it's not me coming up going, hey, end user, Austin Prayton, created this drug, and they're like, where did you get that? Like, I do not trust you, and they shouldn't. But for someone who's a professional in your industry, well regarded, and has a history with it, like that makes more sense versus going, hey, I'm a stranger. Would you like to try this new drug? Because that would not be good if I made it.
Right.
So that it's really cool to hear that, because it's the same thing. Like right before I told him I'd mention him in any podcast from now on, because he heard his name in the other one, but Ronnie, he heard you were coming on and we were bantering back and forth. But it's so cool because he will call me after he listens to every podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, hey, here's my notes on this. Here's what this is. And he's like, well, I mean, does this bother you? Do you have time? And I'm like, dude, as long as I've got time, I'll talk, because I want to hear the feedback.
Right.
And so it's really nice whenever you can hear the good, the bad, the ugly, because I do like when people say, hey, this worked, or this promotion you're doing for me worked. But also, more often than not, people don't want to say the good. They just want to talk about the bad.
Right.
But you have to have an educated decision. You have to have the good and the bad, because you can't make a true educated decision on it if you only have one side. So that's really cool to hear that people are like writing up reports for you to be able to do that. And it's real world statistics. Are those people out of Texas, or were they out of?
Yeah, here in Texas. Yeah, Texas is, again, we're still a new pharmacy, so we're slowly getting licensed in different states. But Texas is kind of the mecca. If you want to be able to have exposure to lots of different species and lots of ranches and lots of animals, Texas is definitely by far the mecca for that.
Yeah, we're blessed in the aspect that we get to go do the less. I don't know. We get to go capture them in their natural state, not sedated state, because that makes me a little nervous depending on what animal it is. But so from like a high level, and like for layman's terms, and you can do the more professional terms too, but how does this compound or any of the compounds work in the animal's body? So, and another part that people might not know, there's ways that you can do it direct into the muscle, directly into the veins. And so when do you do that, and how does it work in the animal's body to immobilize them? Yeah.
So before we kind of get into those types of discussions, the thing I have to make clear is I'm just a pharmacist. So when I give a perspective, it's all about the pharmacology and the pharmacy of things. When we talk about the medical side, that's really where we get out of my realm and kind of into a veterinarian's specialty. But when we answer those questions from a pharmacology standpoint, there are a lot of little tidbits that if an end user understood why they're saying what they're saying out in the field, it kind of all comes together with a full circle, and it helps them, in future use of the drugs. So we'll just use CAP for an example. So that's a combination of butorphanol, medetomidine, and azaparone, and then you have atipamezole and naltrexone. So the first thing you absolutely have to understand is what drug reverses which one, right? So the biggest one that causes the most level of sedation is the medetomidine, and that's reversed by the atipamezole. Typical data and science would say that for every milligram of medetomidine you have to give 5 milligrams of atipamezole, and that's the reversal ratio if you do it milligram to milligram. Now, we've already talked about how we've built that into the concentration so that if you're using our atipamezole with our CAP, that 2-to-1 reversal ratio is perfect, right? The butorphanol is reversed by the naltrexone, okay? And that's where variability comes in. Some people choose not to use the naltrexone depending on the species and the scenario. And then again, that's where we start getting into the, if you want to have questions about that, you can ask, your veterinarian. But the azaparone and butorphanol, they have interesting mechanisms of action, but it's not as pertinent. What you really need to know with the butorphanol and the azaparone is that they work synergistically. So they work together to make so that the medetomidine does a better job for what it's meant to do. The idea would be butorphanol all by itself probably isn't going to put an animal down at a safe dose. Azaparone won't. Medetomidine probably would, but there's some, ramifications to that. But when you put them all three together, that's when the magic really starts to happen. So when we look at the mechanism of action for medetomidine, the easiest way to understand this, and I've had this conversation a lot with end users, is to understand what's happening naturally in our bodies, and then how does medetomidine affect that? So in our bodies, we have chemicals, norepinephrine and epinephrine. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to call it adrenaline, right?
Right.
So our body has its own way to modulate the amount of adrenaline that's in our system. Think of it as if you've got a sink, our body is the basin or the bowl of the sink. The adrenaline is the water, And then we have this system called an alpha-2 system. It's a series of receptors that is the valve for the sync. So if you're driving down the road and a deer runs out in front of you and you get that adrenaline rush, well, the body turned that valve all the way on. You got a huge dump of adrenaline. Well, we can't sustain that, right? So after a certain point of time, the alpha-2 system, so norepinephrine will bind to the alpha-2 receptor, which is, again, that valve, and it shuts the valve off. And then we slowly kind of come down from our adrenaline rush. So the beauty of medetomidine is it is almost like an artificial trigger for that alpha-2 system. So when you get so low of adrenaline, you eventually become sedate and can fall asleep. So we purposely activate that system so strong that even when you do have a little adrenaline going, that gets washed out of your body and you will get so heavily sleepy that you don't really care what's going on. And how that's pertinent. So usually when I have this conversation with end users, the aha moment is, so we'll use an example of a deer. So if we're at a deer farm and you can pretty much walk up and hand inject that deer with your knockdown agent, so with CAP, would you say the adrenaline level of that animal is pretty high or pretty low?
Pretty low.
Right? So that basin, that sync basin, has nothing in it. So when that medetomidine binds, it doesn't have to overcome any natural adrenaline that's already there. That animal usually, and usually is key here, usually takes a pretty low dose and has a pretty quick effect to the drug. Now we take that same deer and we chase him around in a helicopter for 5 minutes. That basin is full of adrenaline.
Right.
So now when you give that dose of medetomidine, there's a lot that it has to overcome before the animal actually will become sedate and immobilized. So when you kind of have that in mind and you're working the animal and you're doing things around the animal, knowing that the more, and it's not always practical, right? But the more you can stay calm, the lowest amount of stimuli you can give helps that drug do its job. I mean, I've seen animals where they've been darted and they're almost asleep, right? They're kind of in this zombie mode, no face mask yet. Somebody walks up and throws a towel over their head or puts a face mask on. It's like giving them an extra bump of drug. They lose that visual stimuli and fall further into that sleep. Right. So we're not stimulating them to their body try to fight and produce more insulin. We've kind of cut that off and asleep they go. So it's kind of a way, I think, at least when I've had these conversations in the past, it's really helped users to go, oh, now I understand why I'm seeing what I'm seeing in the field.
And that's another thing I've talked to other people about is asking why put a mask on them. And it's like, and trying to explain it, but hearing the science behind it, it's like, well, I've always just said to keep them calm. Like, you just don't want them to see. I'm like, well, yes, I don't want them to see me, but I also want to make them calm. That's the number one reason why we use the mask. It's the same thing. The layman's funny term I say is like, when I'm sleeping, I don't want to be looking around. I want my eyes to be covered. I want a dark room. I want to be more comfortable. So the more comfortable we can make the animal, the better husbandry we can, so we can do our jobs, or the vets can do their job of whatever they might be doing for them, or cleaning their hoofs or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. And so is there any other aspect, because that's a beautiful way to describe it, and it helps even me understand of turning the tap on, letting it slowly phase out. But like, is there any other way that, like, how these drugs function, of how the end user might be able to understand better? Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, I'm glad you liked the explanation, because I'm sure my old pharmacology professor is like, what are you talking about? But sometimes to me, that's the easiest way I understand it. And so it makes sense. But yes, there are some other different understandings of pharmacology and how medications work that are very helpful. So if you think about terms like tranquilization, sedation, anesthesia, technically those are all three separate things, right? And with a medetomidine alpha-2 based combination, really what you're getting is a very deep sedation. And so one of the things we're working with carnivores and doing research on bears, you don't want a bear to somehow be stimulated, because again, that medetomidine is shutting off that adrenaline. But at a certain point, you can stimulate an animal enough to get enough of an adrenaline dump that they can have spontaneous arousal, right? So with something like a bear or a carnivore or a really difficult to immobilize animal,
adding a second drug like ketamine, which is a true anesthetic. It's called a dissociative anesthetic, and you get a different plane. Now you're getting into the realm of a true plane of anesthesia.
Right.
And so if an animal is just sedated from medetomidine, auditory responses, I've heard stories where they have a mountain lion down and out and somebody slams the car door and the mountain lion jumps up, stands there for 2 seconds, and then falls back asleep again. So that very hard stimuli can cause those things to happen. When we add ketamine, that's way less likely to happen.
Right.
And so that helps in those aspects. But what we have to remember about ketamine is there's no reversal agent for ketamine. Tilazol is in the same boat. So teletamine, which is in the T of tilazol, that has no reversals. Ketamine and teletamine are the same drug class. So if you're using a combination that has ketamine, what you have to remember is the reversal agent for ketamine is just time. It's the animal's body metabolizing the drug. And depending on how much ketamine you've given, that relates to how long you want to give them before you reverse any of the other drugs. So if you use like a medetomidine, butorphanol, and azapirone and ketamine, so we have a CAP-K, right, which has its place. The idea is you want to give the animal enough time to metabolize that before you reverse the medetomidine and the butorphanol. Right. Because ketamine, and again, this is probably an oversimplification, but the way it was explained in school, you kind of have a couple phases, right? When it's light and you don't have a whole lot of ketamine, you kind of get more of a drowsy kind of reaction. If it's enough in an acute setting, they can get like this ataxic type scenario where they don't have their balance, they don't have their wits about them, and the way it's been described to me and the way I've seen it, like in horses, they go nuts, they go crazy, right? But if you give them
freaking out, they don't know what's happening,
exactly.
But they're still cognitive.
Correct. So if you can give them long enough to exit that phase, metabolize enough of it so that they're just kind of groggy and hanging their head, and then reverse them, it's a much smoother process. So remembering that about ketamine, that we just can't reverse it, but it has a wonderful place, like in those bears. And for example, with our CAP-K, one of the things we're trying really hard to do is find that balance of ketamine to give it just enough oomph to prevent those spontaneous arousals, or to fully get down an animal that's a little tricky, but not so much ketamine that you're having to wait 30, 45 minutes before you reverse.
Right.
I'll tell you a story I heard from a wildlife vet. In grizzly bears, they use their protocol at this facility is that they use tilazol, and I think maybe a couple other combinations of things. And you don't mess around with grizzly bears. So when they're estimating weight and dose, there's no, I'm going to give it just enough. It's no, we're sedating that animal fully. And they've had biologists have to sit out there in the culvert trap in a truck waiting for this grizzly, because you can't just leave a grizzly bear just laying there, right? 2, 3, 4 hours before it gets up and walks off, because there is no reversal. And a lot of that is dose dependent and species dependent.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's not like an Impala here in Texas. You can just pick up and throw in the bed of the truck and be like, yeah, it'll wake up eventually. So, yeah, I would lose my mind, like how when you said that they slammed the car door in that mountain lion, I would have been in a different state if that thing stood up.
Me too. So I was on a Zoom meeting not that long ago where they were discussing a cougar project that the veterinarian was working on, and he was telling the story just like, it was just a normal Tuesday, and I was kind of like, man, that's scary. But
yeah, there's even been, I don't know. I'll save my stories for other one because we have you on here for more important reasons. But what are some other mistakes and misunderstandings that you see that people who don't fully understand the pharmaceutical side of it, and when they're immobilizing something, I mean, even we're joking around, but it can be dangerous. So what are some common misconceptions with using those drugs?
Yeah, whether it's a misconception or just a reminder that from a pharmacy perspective, we are striving for perfection in an imperfect situation or science.
Right.
No two animals are the same. Doing this for over a decade, I can tell you, and having so many conversations with people, you can go dart we'll use a kudu, for example. You dart a kudu on Tuesday and you work that herd and everything was great and you used a particular dose and you think you got everything figured out, and you go on Friday to a ranch 100 miles away with the same body composition, same age, same everything, you use the same dose, and it just doesn't work at all.
Right.
And I'm not saying that drugs are perfect, right? Because they're not. Everything is got its faults, but for the most part, There's a lot of variables at play, and sometimes we just can't make it perfect. And if you were in, let's take this for an example. What we're doing, if we were to do this in the human side of things, we would be in either a hospital or a specialized doctor's office. We'd have a team of doctors and nurses watching over us, and we'd be hooked up to every machine that exists. And then on top of that, the drugs that we're using have been studied to the nth degree on one species that only has a little variable in weight and gender, right? So now we're doing this out in, 1,000 acres, and sometimes it's one or two people, and we have zero to no monitoring equipment. And now we're dealing with dozens of species that all act differently. So it's a challenge. And the people that are really good at it, I am so impressed because it is an art. I think we have, over time, I think the drugs and things have improved to the point where you can really be successful, right? A lot of people can be successful, but the individuals that have really made it an art, it's amazing to watch them do their thing.
Well, do you think, I know you're not a vet, but I'm going to ask your opinion anyway, but do you think it could be a genetic thing too? Because I know people in my family who don't react well to medicine. Like my wife cannot have anything. Like she has to have surgery. She's going to be sick for a week because she cannot handle medicine. So do you think it could be a genetic trait in wildlife as well?
Yeah. So in theory, and I don't even have to answer this as a quote unquote vet. So from a pharmacology standpoint, we know for a fact that we have liver enzymes. They're cytochrome enzymes. So there are certain people that produce certain enzymes at a higher level than others, lower level than others. And so you may metabolize the drug quicker than I do. So you're going to take more of a dose and it's not going to last so long than as long as if I took it, right? So you are 100% correct. There is a genetic component within our bodies, whether it be metabolizing the drug through the liver, excreting it through the urine, all of those types of things that do play. So if it's that way on the human side, I don't think it's a far stretch to say that it might be the same way in animals.
Yeah, because I think that's the other side, and we can't really ask them, right? Like you said, little furry four-legged clients. And so it's like I can't just go out there and be like, so how did you react to this? And they're going to be like, what? So, but being able to document those things to be like, hey, Yellow 13 freaked out and she needed a double dose, or her daughter was able to do this. Like I'm thinking about kudu, but it's like if you're able to even track and log those things, not only what you use, but how they reacted, it could be huge. Again, you have people sending you some stuff like that, but if any farm and rancher or ranch manager would document those things, it could help our industry tremendously. Being able to say, hey, this, and coming from a marketer, you might be able to sell that female for even more, going, hey, she reacts super well to drugs and everything, and she has a better history with being able to be under drugs, and she reacts well, and she reverts back quicker than others. And so I don't know if we'll ever get to that point, and I don't know if anyone ever would market that, but if you could.
I mean, from my perspective, I love data. I don't care if it's anecdotal and someone's just talking to me about a dose that they liked on their sable that they used our product on.
Right.
I keep record of every bit of it. So if you talk to me and you tell me what dose you use, it's getting put in my spreadsheet.
Right.
And because you are correct, we're already with the research we're doing, we're already finding interesting trends and things, ways to look at immobilization that we never have before. Like for example, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but people talk a lot about time to recumbency or time to when the animal's laying down. That time to first effect is huge, right? And we're starting to see this interesting trend that as we hone our doses, and again, this is all just theory at this point, but we're finding a trend that when we get an animal that someone says, yep, that was a perfect dose, we're finding that time to first effect to time to recumbency is at a certain ratio, right? Meaning when we have our barriers of getting into the bloodstream. So when we talk about pharmacy and the drugs working, we have two main barriers. We got to get it into the bloodstream. We got to get it into the brain, right? Getting into the bloodstream is probably the biggest challenge right now. So if we can have a quick first effect, so that animal slows down and really is just kind of walking and you can tell it's having an effect, and it happens real quick. Well, that means we did our job. We got the drug into the bloodstream. Our non-pharmacologic stuff that we're working on in theory, it's working. That animal's feeling it fast. But if it takes an extra 10 minutes before it actually lays down, that tells me we got enough drug to the brain, or we got drug to the brain, we just didn't get enough of it there. If the time from first effect to recumbency is really short, Well, then we're starting to see that maybe that was too much of a dose, right? Where the breathing was slower and, we just didn't see the physiological effects that we were looking for. So it seems like there's this nice kind of trend between time to first effect, time to recumbency, that if we can hit that sweet spot, we're seeing that, and again, this is very different for a lot of animals, but that's usually within a couple minutes of each other, and it seems to be working well.
Yeah, because I noticed that on Sam's. I love Sam's Instagram, Facebook, everything he does. And so when the wildlife vet, we can add him on there, but when he does his voiceovers and he like is able to track his drone and stuff, I noticed there was a guy that commented the other day, because I think even Sam rebutted and said, like, I may be over exaggerating when I say like he ran for 2 miles, because the comment was, well, then up your dosage. Now, again, I don't remember Sam's response, but it was very professional. It's like, well, it's actually not that case. It's because he X, Y, and Z and explained it. But I want to hear your opinion on that. Is it because you're hitting, let's say it's a kudu male. Kudu males weigh quite a bit. And so do you think that they're running based off of your explanation with that? Now, that might not be fair because we don't know what Sam used and what he was doing, or even if it was your product. But in general, do you think that is it, and I'm questioning myself even asking this, but I'll just ask it. Is it the fact that it may just be too little of a drug and that's why they ran? Is it the fact that different animals react differently to different compounded drugs? Or is it still just a research game?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think if we go back to the talk about striving for perfection in an imperfect science, that's where, to answer that question, there's about 1,000 variables that I can think of. And I only know the pharmacy side. You talk to somebody like Dr. Sam or Dr. Pat, you're going to get a whole different physiological side that maybe have an impact. But here's an interesting concept. So I think there's a lot to do with kind of that prey, and this is all theory again.
Right.
But you take an animal that is very flighty, has been preyed upon for years and for centuries. They take pound for pound way more drug than something that just kind of nobody messes with, which you'd think is opposite, right? So a moose, I'm going to give a moose for an example, and a white-tailed deer. Pound for pound, that white-tailed deer is taking way more drug than a moose does to go down, right? And when you think about, again, going back to that idea of adrenaline and that basin concept, that moose, he doesn't care. I mean, you've been hunting, right? In Wyoming, we run into moose all the time, right? That moose does not care about me being there. In fact, they probably would rather just run me over.
Right. That
white-tailed deer just smells me from 1,000 yards away, and they're gone. So I think that may be part of it. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. It's an interesting theory to study, because if you could figure that out, like, why does this animal run so much farther than the other? That's the golden ticket right
Absolutely. There. Yeah, because that's the other part, is you've got different variables from what I would say. I'm not saying anyone else has ever told me this, but from weather, from if it was cold the day before, if it was hot, it's depending what time they darted it, when it was, how many people were there. Like, I just think there's so many aspects, because like we can tell, even going in and take pictures and videos of animals, they can tell when it's not the normal ranch manager, the person feeding. Like, people don't want, depending who I talk to, some people give animals the credit they deserve, and some people just act like, oh, they don't know what you're doing. I'm like, I think they can tell a difference of when little Sally Sue's going in to fill feeders every day versus when there's other guys and we have our big equipments. And so, yeah, it's just interesting theory. But I mean, I would jump on that theory as well, as like their heart rate's going to be up just because they're running around. They don't like people in general. So yeah, it makes sense. It's something that I could get behind on. But go ahead.
Yeah. So, again, when you think about that, and a vet could go into this way more detail, but the whole idea, again, is that it needs to get into the bloodstream, right? So that's where we like deep intramuscular injections. And every now and then you get lucky and you hit a vein, right? So, in fact, I had a guy telling me the other day, he goes, wow, your product is amazing. I can't believe what it just did. This animal was down in 2 minutes. I've never seen that happen. And I said, well, you think maybe there's a chance you got lucky and went into a vein? Because it happens. It's a thing. And he goes, oh, I didn't think about that. And he goes, well, let me go dart a few more. Let's let the day end, and I'll tell you what the average was. Well, the average was not 2 minutes. But the opposite, I think, is true, right? You may have visually done what you thought was a perfect shot, and maybe it got into just a certain pocket or space where it just didn't absorb very, very well. So then again, that comes into so many different variables in success.
And so what other types of animals are you primarily working with? Because in Texas, I hear like bears and all this, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So I guess let me start with this, is what states are you in, and what animals are in those states that you're working with? Yeah.
So again, right now, pretty limited as far as the states. We're Wyoming, Colorado, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Texas. We've added a couple, and we're about ready to add more. So I'm making sure I get that right. But those are the states that we're licensed in. Texas, we have the whole gamut, right? Pennsylvania, a lot of black bears, white-tailed deer, elk. They have elk in Pennsylvania. And then obviously Wyoming, it's all the big game species. So I would say predominantly everything we do is wildlife in one fashion or another, other than our domestic goats for our capture course. And in quite frankly, it works so well in domestic goats. We had a vet that was auditing one of those courses, and he immediately, he asked the vet that runs the course, well, what drug is that? And he told him. We got a phone call the next day, and he's like, I want to order a bunch of this. This is amazing. I've never seen a drug work in goats this way. And I don't think it's necessarily, humbly, I don't necessarily think it's our drug. It's the fact that this combination just works really good in that animal. And so, maybe we start doing more for the goat species.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. 'Cause different species obviously react, I think, differently. We've established that, but is there a different approach the end user should be taking depending on what species they are? Is it dosage? Is it protocols? And what should they be looking for?
Yeah, so that's where I'll kind of defer, because we start getting into, that's really the ultimate decision of the veterinarian. What I can tell you from an observer is absolutely, veterinarians seem to consistently have different approaches for those different species. And sometimes it is as simple as, if I look at the prescriptions we continually get, this particular species, the volume is just higher, the dose is higher. And they use the same drug, but they have different volumes or different doses for the two different species. And then there's certain species that they want a completely different drug combination altogether. And that really is the choice of the veterinarian. And the great thing about the veterinarians is they have access to drugs that the typical end user doesn't.
Right.
Those ultra-potent opioids are, I've heard veterinarians say there's scenarios where I wouldn't want to use that particular drug, but for the most part, an ultra-potent opioid is amazing. It was probably about a month ago for the first time I got to actually watch Thionyl be used. Heard about it, watched videos of it, but never really gotten to see it. And on some species, and you probably know this, you start making noise, you clap your hands, and the animal actually comes
Runs
to
right
you, right? And then you can sometimes gently, sometimes rough, but grab a hold of them and escort them to the ground. It was amazing to watch. So the bummer is they're just so controlled that it's essentially impossible for a normal end user to be able to access those drugs.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it happening, and the vet was very much like, we're going to hit him, they're going to run away, we're going to make a bunch of noise, they're going to run to us, and we're going to walk him on the trailer. And I'm like, no, we're not. And as sure as rain, he just exactly verbatim. And I was like, well, I guess that's why you do this for a living.
Yep.
And I just have never seen that before. And is that the same drug where they grind their teeth more?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I remember, because we got him in the trailer, I think this was a bongo we were doing it with. Got him in the trailer, untying everything, shutting the gates and all this. And I'm like, what is that noise? He's like, oh, he's grinding his teeth. I'm like, oh, ha, ha. And he's like, no, look. And I opened up his lips, and he was grinding his teeth, sure enough.
Yep.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. Like you said, it's an art. And like being able to watch someone do their craft as well as they can. And it's kind of like insurance too. Like, no, the drug is not readily available to the public, but the reason you have the vet there is for that one instance that something goes wrong, they save that animal, or they save you.
Right.
They can predict what's going to happen, and that's why you have them there. And I think most people are like, I don't want to say most, but most people are like, well, I just want it. I can use it. I've seen the vet do it. And it's like, well, it's not so much the application of using it. It's when something goes wrong.
Right. And they are so dangerous and so potent. When we used to compound it at Zofarm, we would compound atorphine. The precautions that were taken and all of that would go on during that process, the tiniest little granule that you can't even see, right, touches the inside of your nose or gets on your lip and you're out like a light. So to me, if I was an end user, yeah, it's great, but I would rather not. Like, I'll let the vet do it and handle that, just from because it is so highly specialized.
And then we've talked about how they react differently. Are there any species that react poorly or more of a challenge to use pharmaceutical drugs on?
Yeah. So again, I think we've established most of my experience is theory or talking to clients, but I have never heard anybody say that a zebra is easy to catch. And I think, there are some veterinarians though that have developed their own kind of cocktail of ultra potence, and they have it down to a science, right? But if I hear anybody tell me a fun story of something that got a little awry, it almost always starts with a Z.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a time I'll keep this short because it's not that great, but we were moving Zebra and we're pulling and trying to get him onto the trailer, and he's, like you said, he's kind of drunk, walking around. You can tell he's feeling it, and I am slowly going down a hill because the Zebra just decided to lean that way. And the kid that was next to me, I was like, do not let go of that hoof up there, because if you do, and about the time I said as soon as you do, that Zebra just fell on top of me and then started kicking, and thank God I didn't get hurt. But yeah, it's I've had people been bit, kicked, but zebras do not react well to any type of drugs that I've ever seen.
Yeah. And in all honesty, from what we've seen from a pharmacy, most equids, so any of the horse, we have a horse rescue in Laramie that we work with a lot, and horses in general can be a challenge. But I think, again, you have a veterinarian that's their specialty. They're able to hone their drugs and hone their doses, and the husbandry of the animal, the effectiveness, all of that just works really well.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. We'll have to get Mark and Lisa Doring on. I wonder how they move their horses and stuff. Some of our clients, but they're into whitetail and they're getting into exotics. But it's interesting to hear that equids in general just don't react well.
Yeah, and I could be wrong. That's just, at least when we get prescriptions and we talk to clients, that's always kind of been the general theme of things.
And I feel like I've heard that too. For what reason? Who knows? Maybe we can do a study on it. But,
yeah.
But from a business standpoint, you mentioned all the states that y'all are licensed in. What does it take to get a license to be a pharmacist in that state?
Yeah, good question. So when we do our home state, we have to be inspected. And then the more specialized you are, so we're a specialty pharmacy in regards to, we do sterile compounding. So that inspection is a whole nother separate ballgame compared to just a typical Walmart or a Walgreens. So one of the challenges, especially as things changed in 2023 regulatory wise, it used to be if your home state basically inspected you and said you passed your home state, there were a lot of other states that would say, okay, if you pass Wyoming, we'll just accept you and get you licensed. Now there's National Associations of Board of Pharmacy, so NABP. They're kind of the big group that oversees, and they make a lot of decisions and have a lot of guidance in the pharmacy world. They do a universal inspection that's very in depth. It's I wouldn't say difficult might be the wrong word, but they literally go through everything, right? And they don't just look at what's acceptable; they look at best practice. So in pharmacy, we have kind of a range of, well, this is acceptable, this is minimum requirements, and we have best practice. NABP holds you to best practice standards, and so what our plan is to have that inspection here soon. They have minimum requirements. So you have to dispense a certain number of prescriptions. You have to do a whole variety of things to qualify. So, and then it's a surprise inspection. So they could show up once you schedule that, they can pretty much show up at any time. Well, if we're going to be at, NADIFA or EWA, and the two owners of the pharmacy aren't there, we can't have an inspection. So once we kind of get through that, we will have that inspection. And then we are able to get licensed in a variety of other states. Some states require not only the pharmacy to be licensed in that state, they need a pharmacist or the pharmacist in charge to also be licensed in that state. And that's, again, part of Dan's genius. I think he's licensed in 24 different states, right? 24, 25 different states. So we're really kind of positioned well, and that once we get that NABP inspection, we'll start kicking off a lot of states to be licensed in.
So Texas, as we mentioned, that's kind of my hometown, my market, but what other states, you mentioned earlier, but I know you mentioned the black bear, but what's like the oddball in there that y'all like prescribe for? Because like to me, a bear is an oddball, but I figured to you that might just be a normal Tuesday.
Right.
So what would be an oddball to you?
Well, so at a certain point, when we get licensed in enough states, zoos are a big client base, and they've got every animal under the sun. I was trying to think of the most unique thing. We've done some work in the past with doing sea life, and that's a challenge, right? Man. Because if they're near the water or in the water, and kind of their dive reflex and some of the things that happen there. So that's been interesting. Trying to think if there's any other kind of unique species, but for the most part, you name it and people figure out a way to immobilize them.
That's wild. So on the other side of that, that's kind of the fun question, but a not fun thing going on right now in Texas. I'm sure there's other states that are having it, but specifically to Texas, there's regulatory issues that are very prevalent right now. And so from what you know and what you can say is what's going on in that space, and why should people in our industry be paying attention?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we already talked about the one thing you can get from me is that the three team combo, right? That's a huge in this aspect, right? But we could spend a whole podcast on regulatory requirements, especially from a pharmacy perspective. But in general, what we're dealing with now are controlled substance prescriptions, the acquisition of those controlled substance prescriptions, and then how do we utilize them once we have the prescription? And that's really where we're seeing kind of that extra oversight. The interesting part is, from a pharmacy perspective, these are not new rules or any kind of thing that's really changed. We've had to, it's always been a patient-specific prescription and written out to a specific owner, right? Some of the variability and some of the gray area comes with how do we define patient and who is the owner? What if it's an LLC? Like those kind of things. But we've been navigating that for years. Right. I think what's happened is, as our industry grows and we're becoming more and more successful, and there's, we're getting big, that regulatory oversight is stronger. And so, when you think about it, the difficult part is when you start defining some of that gray area. Most regulations, whether you're talking about from a state level or from a federal level, are written out for the perspective of human pharmacy, right? So if we're going to define a patient, right, that's easy. It's a human being. It's you or I. A patient isn't the Marutzky family, right? But in the veterinary world, that's not always the case. And for example, patient is actually not defined in many states or at the level of the DEA. They don't have it in their code. You can't pull it up and search patient, do like a search all for patient and find an actual definition for it, because it's written for the perspective of human use. So we have to be able to navigate some of that gray area to be able to do the best we can to comply and still provide care for our patients. Now, that's one of the benefits of, I feel like, our background is that we have spent, because of the nature of the pharmacy where we worked for so long and the drugs that we had, we were inspected by the DEA every year, like clockwork, not because it was just a routine inspection, because of the drugs that we had. We had states in all of these different states. We had states that would visit us every single year. So the amount of inspections that we have had is immense, but that also has helped us develop relationships with regional agents, so regional DE agents, like within the Denver office, or people at headquarters. Dan has, email contact with people at DEA headquarters on a regular basis. So we are able, over the course of time, we have been able to kind of get clarification on certain things, and to get the DEA to put anything in writing is very difficult, right? But they will answer some of your questions. And in fact, we were able to find, it was a lady that used to come and inspect us moved to the regional or the headquarters office, and she did a talk specifically addressing the definition of a patient and acknowledged the fact that we really don't have a definition, right? So we're going to go with, of the states that do, if they're stricter than us, you have to follow the stricter version for each individual state. but then we're going to accept the general medical veterinary definition of patient, which for the most part is accepted as a species, like a species group herd of animals with common ownership. And we have the document, we have, it was a presentation she did, and it's in a slideshow, and we have where they specifically talk about that. Now you're never going to find it in the DEA code,
right?
But that's one of our biggest challenges, is to try to navigate all of this. And coming back to the communication part, no one's going to know that, but you're like the answer to that question right there, like really digging into how does DEA define a patient? I'll be perfectly honest with you. There are instances where you got to remember all these regional DEA agents, their specific training is probably more related to human pharmacy.
Right.
We are incredibly niche, our entire industry, right? So to be able to best extrapolate how they've learned it in school and then apply it to our industry is hard. And terms, you have to be very specific about the terms you use, compounded versus manufactured item, all types of different things that it's very tricky, because I don't doubt, not a doubt in my mind, because I've seen this happen, where a particular DEA agent may give you an interpretation, and who's going to argue? They're the DEA. How are you going to argue that, right?
I was going to ask, do you think they leave it vague for a reason?
I sometimes I wonder, right? So I'll give you an example. So pretty regularly, Dan would have to get, I would say probably 3 or 4 times a year, Dan would get on the phone with a research facility or a clinic that was getting their audit from the DEA. And at that point, the DEA was just convinced that, however they got this drug or this prescription was wrong, and they were utilizing it incorrect. And the vet would say, well, now, wait a minute. This is how I've been getting this for years. Let me just double check. Like, can you please talk to my pharmacy and let's talk about this? Well, the drug was so unique, didn't even know it existed, right? And lo and behold, they call Dan. Dan spends 5 minutes talking to this DEA agent. And over that course of the conversation, they go from, well, yeah, you have a violation, to, oh, no, actually what you're doing is perfectly correct. Have a good day. But at initial point where the end user is trying to explain how they're utilizing the drug, and they don't know the difference between manufacturer versus compounded product, and the implications that means to a DEA agent that's there auditing you. So that's part of the difficulty, is getting things settled. And, just because it's one interpretation doesn't mean that that's really truly how it is. If you come at it from a different angle and you use one different word, all of a sudden it makes a whole world of difference, right? That's the complicated part about this. So navigating it is, that's again why I say we could spend a whole podcast on this. We could have a whole panel of people up here and discuss these topics. And then everybody has their own background. Like, I'm sure that conversation Dan has had with some of those DEA agents, they're not recorded. They're not written down anywhere, but it was clarification from the headquarters at the DEA office. And that's what makes it complicated.
Pause on the podcast. This is an ad. Did you know that Droptine Studios offers a plethora of different services that can benefit your business? Yes, we offer photos, videos, but did you know that we offer website design, graphic design, print materials, and social media management? Even if you're not a sponsor of this podcast, it would tremendously help us if you would hire us for our normal services that my company offers. So go to droptimestudios.com and let's talk about how our company can benefit yours. How are those regulations and complications, how are those affecting your clients, whether it's a rancher, a veterinarian, a wildlife operator? How is that going to affect them?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. And usually when we kind of turn this back to the human side of things, it makes sense. Yeah, you're right. I would never do that with my Vicodin prescription. Right. So when you think about your ability to possess a controlled substance, and really any prescription drug for that matter, but we'll talk controlled substances. As an end user, your ability to possess that drug is the prescription, right? And there's all these other things in the backside that you have to be issued that prescription, right? But once you have that prescription, that's what allows you to possess that Vicodin. So if you're let's say you have a dislocated shoulder and you get a pain medicine, well, we won't even pick on Vicodin, just any controlled substance. And you're a tough guy, you took half the bottle, you don't need it, right? And your neighbor down the road gets bucked off his horse, he's hurting. It just makes human sense to go, I'm going to help this guy out. He's in pain. I would love to help him. He's my neighbor. I love him. But technically, that prescription is yours. And if you give it to him, that's a violation. Right. Or, so there's a lot of ways to think about that. But if you come back to it as how this is affecting our users. So again, defining patient, defining who's the owner. I mean, there's a lot of little nuances there that's part of why I would encourage any end user to have a specific conversation, because the way you use it on your ranch might be different than the way somebody else does. And I promise you there's a path forward, right? It may not be the way you've always done it, but there is a path forward. There is a way we can kind of do things to make sure that we're compliant and still taking care of the patient.
Right.
So I think, from the perspective of you being able to get a prescription, like if we're talking end users, like let's just be frank. If you're talking about end users and you get a prescription for your animal, let's just say Sable on your ranch, technically, just like you wouldn't go take that other controlled prescription that you got for your hurt arm and give that to your neighbor, you can't take that drug and go to a different ranch and use it on a different ranch and a different group of animals, because the only reason you're possessing that prescription is because it was written out for that species on that ranch.
Right.
And again, you everything I'm telling you right now, there's exceptions to those rules, and there's different variations. So that's why it's really hard to have these conversations about, like, from a global perspective.
Right.
It's easier to do them like a panel discussion, and we talk about different scenarios. And if you have a particular situation, call the pharmacy, call your vet, and we'll talk it through.
Yeah, because I think that's one someone brought up, that they were like, okay, well, if I bought these animals, so say it's Daniel's ranch, and I bought all of Daniel's Sable, well, it's my drugs because it's my animals. And that's where I think that was at the last panel discussion at EWA, and they were like, nope, the dirt you stand on has to be. And so that's the same deal where some people were like, yeah, that's the thing, is he bought those animals, and other people were like, nope, his vet has not seen those animals, talked about those animals, and had that relationship with those animals. Now, that's where I would go. Terms, definitions are so important, because technically that's that gray area. He goes, well, your client or your client species, if you will, Sable, those now classify under his. So the logical side of me goes, yeah, that makes sense. Like, he bought them, they're his. It's his script prescribed to Austin's ranch. That's now my animals. Makes sense. It's like, and half the panel said yes, half the panel said no, if I remember right, but they were like, nope, has to be from Daniel's ranch, Daniel's drugs on his property for his animals until they're in your possession.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting to the point where I probably should clarify that I'm not a lawyer, and nothing I say should be taken as legal advice. But if we really just get down to the brass tacks of things, this is where it gets complicated, because there's so many variables. But if I take that example, if let's say it's just it's a dog, you and your wife own a dog, and technically that prescription belongs to the dog. If you want to get down to the nit and gritty, it belongs to the dog. You just happen to be the owner of it, and a dog has no autonomy for basically accounting for that controlled substance. So that's why we tie an owner to it. Well, then this is a hypothetical. What happens if you sell that dog? Well, technically the prescription was the dog's. The only thing that's changed is the owner. But I think there is not a perfect answer, because we don't have rules that specifically spell that out.
Right.
And that's when your comment about terms matter, definitions matter, and you start snowballing. And before you realize it, you spent 30 minutes talking in circles, and there really is no good answer, because we don't have definitions for some things. But like, if all the Sable are sold, I would think the most straightforward way is, like, if you think about most fishing games, the elk herd, quote unquote herd, even though they're all elk and they're all owned by the state of Wyoming or the public, the elk herd in Jackson Hole is technically treated different than the elk herd in Laramie, Wyoming, because they're geographically, they're far enough apart, and they're their own. Just because this herd may have a specific disease running through it doesn't mean this herd does, and so they're kind of treated like separate patients. I think again, I would like a vet's opinion on this, but I would imagine by the vet board's definition, yes, they're the same species and they're technically owned by the same person, but that was a whole different group of Sable than what the doctor developed that patient-client relationship with from the original Sable. And I'm guessing, because I'm not a veterinarian, but I'm guessing that's probably their, most of their stance on that. But if the vet came out, and even just because they're on someone else's property, if you own them and you bought them and the vet happens to be there and says, yep, those are your Sable, I'm looking at them, this is, I'm doing a herd check, I'm doing this, I can now validly write you a prescription. I write you a prescription, you use the drug, and then you'd be able to take them off. I think that's probably the most black and white way to go through that scenario. But I think if you and I sat down like off camera and really thought about it longer, we might be able to think up 3 more ways to do that.
Well, and I think too, the aspect of like, if you're buying someone's entire Sable herd, like talking about getting down to the brass tacks, pay the couple $1,000s to have a vet come out and do a survey. It's not worth risking it to do it on your own. Like if you can fork out that much money to buy this guy's entire Sable herd, a couple $1,000s to have Sam or whoever come out. We're picking on Sam on this episode, I guess, but it's not worth you risking it and doing that. Just have him come out, say he's done an evaluation with it, not say, actually do his evaluation with all of your animals now that this has happened, and everything's legal. I know most people don't like rules, and I promise I'm one of the top people who hates the government and overarching powers, but in general, it is just not worth it. There's no Sable, there's no whitetail, there's no anything worth not playing by the rules.
Right. And to be honest with you, in an ideal world, they would just develop a whole other set of rules for our veterinary industry that make sense, right? But again, not to beat this dead horse, but to be honest with you, when I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm already thinking of other ways that you could potentially do this that technically are legal. But then you have to look at it as, okay, how far, like technically, yes, this is correct, but how far do I want to push that, right? Yeah. To the point where if someone happened to come in and audit me, what are they going to think? Because again, we've already established the fact that you might get one answer from a particular inspector, but if you got a different inspector on that same day, they may give you a totally separate answer.
Right.
And so communicating with your pharmacy and with your veterinarian is 1,000% to me right now in this moment. That's how I would answer every one of those questions. Take that individual scenario, talk it through with the people that's their expertise, let them brainstorm, let them think about it. And if you have to get clarification about something, I've had a DE agent specifically tell me, we would rather you ask and let's talk it through, and we'll guide you one way or another. And maybe, we'll come to a conclusion together. Then you just ask for forgiveness later.
Right.
And if we don't know the answer, so if you called our pharmacy and Dan happened to not know the answer, I guarantee you he has an avenue to find the answer for you, or at least the best answer we could ever possibly come up with.
Right.
And so it's just a phone call.
Yeah. Well, that's what's nice with y'all, is being able to call and talk to you both directly. And so off your website, haven't been to your lab or anything yet, but y'all had that clean room. Mm-hmm. And so can you kind of walk me through what that looks like, what it's used for, and why it's critical for your business?
Yeah. So we you showed me the server room and things like that here and talked about it being your beating heart. The clean room is the beating heart of any sterile compounding pharmacy. And there's a lot of ways you can design a clean room suite. We chose to do what's called a modular clean room. So it's its own standalone unit. It's in the middle of our pharmacy. Well, not in the dead middle, but essentially we're not tied into any of the structural walls. It's its own unit, its own standalone unit. We're able to walk around the full thing 360. We can access any of the HEPA filtration systems, the electrical system, all that kind of stuff. So when an inspector comes in, they can look at everything if they want. And then the idea of a clean room is as you progress, as you get deeper from room to room to room in the clean room, it gets more sterile, quote unquote. And they have guidelines and things that you have to meet for each room. But basically, you gown and you garb in one room, you compound in a second room, and you end up with this solution. And then in the cleanest possible area of our suite is where things get filtered, sterilized, and bottled into their individual units. And that clean room system is recertified every 6 months. And kind of a humble little brag about our pharmacy is everything, when you talk about particulate matter, it's defined as an ISO class. So ISO 5, ISO 6, and there's a factor of 10 between each one of those ISO classes. ISO 5 is the maximum amount of particulate you can have in your hood to certify it as sterile and do compounding, right? So 5 is kind of the benchmark within your hood, right? The subsequent rooms, as you get quote unquote dirtier, they can be ISO 7 and then they can eventually be ISO 8, right? So you have a range with each room. On our last certification, the room that technically is the dirtiest, where you're gowning and garbing and washing your hands, was cleaner than ISO 5. The middle room where we compound and do the drugs was, again, cleaner than ISO 5. I think the room that the hood is housed in was ISO 3, and there was 0 particulate count in the hood. And the certification guy goes, yeah, to be honest with you, most pharmacies that do their due diligence, they end up with similar results. He goes, but man, just everything is super clean in here. And teasing him, we said, well, why don't you just take your little instrument and put it outside of the clean room, right? Just put it on the counter where we, are putting together orders and stuff.
Right.
I think that was ISO 6. So that almost met the requirements of the hood. And part of that is by design, because we have our filtration system and the way we work our air, we have an immense amount of air changes per hour. So the minimum for certain rooms, let's just say for argument's sake, is 35 air changes per hour, 30 air changes per hour. We're getting 160 air changes per hour in one of our rooms. So that filtered air is recirculating 160 times every hour. Every molecule of air is changed from filtered air 160 times an hour. And then we've figured out a way to kind of filter some of that or force some of that air into the general space of the pharmacy. So when you walk into our pharmacy, you're breathing very, very clean air.
Man, you might need to charge for that on the side. Just have people come in. I'm pretty sure people pay for that at spas to just sit in clean room.
Yeah. But we have to have that. We have to have that for quality and those types of things with our products. We spend way too much time, taking something from theory. You make it to see if you can actually make it into a drug, right? Can we even get that drug that concentrated? Well, we prove that we can in the lab. And then we do all this field studies and research to make sure that it's efficacious and that it's safe in the animals. And you do all this legwork. Well, then the key is you got to be able to repeat it. You got to have accuracy, precision, and repeatability. And having the clean room system designed like we do helps us to do that. I mean, the amount of behind the scenes things that go on is immense that no one would ever know we're doing, but it's all to ensure product quality. We've been compounding these drugs. I think we're going on 12 years now, 12 or 13 years. And so you develop steps. I mean, if you had your head over my shoulder while I'm in there compounding, you'd think this guy's got something wrong with him, because I'm like OCD. Everything is a very specific place for a specific reason, and it's double and triple checks. It's other checks and balances. And then on top of that, we send our products out to get tested. So we take out random samples from each batch, and they test for sterility, they test for potency, endotoxin, fungal presence, the whole gamut of things. And it's all stuff that's kind of done without anybody ever knowing it or seeing it. But the goal is that when that product leaves the pharmacy, we have done everything we possibly can to make sure that it is going to be successful in your hands. And we owe it to our customers to do that. Again, treating your customers like family. The idea is, would I give that to my own animal? Or I had a professor tell me a long time ago that when you're compounding a drug, especially a sterile drug, think about giving that to your 3-year-old little girl.
Right.
If you don't have enough, pride and knowing that you did everything perfect to immediately inject that into yourself or a family member, you need to rethink what you're doing. And so by treating our customers like family, we make sure that the product is to our best ability as consistent and workable as possible.
Yeah, I wish the guy we bought our home from did that, because they would be like, oh, well, everything's up to regulation. I'm like, would you let your family live here? And he's like, everything's up to regulation.
Right.
But no, it's really encouraging to be able to have those people that care enough to take those extra steps. And so I know, and there may be a part of this question I don't even know what I'm asking, and you hit on quite a few, but what all else? Like, I find it immensely interesting about how you're filtering out the air, and what else. What other steps are y'all taking behind the scenes that aren't, or did you mention everything? Because I'm just fascinated with the fact that all that has to happen. I might have to fly up one day and go
come
see the pharmacy.
Yeah. So, on the compounding side of things, when we talk about our clean room, so the particulate matter is just one aspect.
Right.
That's one of the things it's easy, it's tangible, you can talk about an ISO class. The other is every time we get certified, they take air samples to make sure that there's no bacteria or contamination in the air. They do random surface samples everywhere. They check the flow of air. So different rooms have to have pressure differentials, right? Pressure gradients. So the whole idea is if you have your cleanest room that's at the end, if there is some sort of particulate that's generated, the only way it can flow is out of the room. So he actually walks in there with this smoke machine and puts smoke all by our doors and everywhere in like the corners of the room and make sure that the airflow is appropriate. And then I actually have to go into the hood and make a mock compound, and he blows smoke within the hood itself to make sure that my hands aren't interrupting first air. So first air is a pharmacy term. That's air that's coming directly from the filter, right? So if we don't impede that in any way and it's touching the most critical parts of our compound, there's no way I'm contaminating it, right? Now, if I wipe my hand over it and I happen to have bacteria on my hand, then I potentially can contaminate it. That's part of technique. So they test your technique in the compounding process and the bottling process. Just about everything you can imagine is tested. And then, so we talked about testing individual batches. Well, before we can even get to that point, even though we can't put 360 days of beyond use dating on there, we still do the same basic gamut of testing. So we have to do a test to prove that the third-party analytical test that they do to show that our product is sterile. We have to do a test for the test to make sure that the test works. Like it gets, it's redundant, but we have to do that. And then we do an antimicrobial effectiveness test. So that allows us to put multi-dose vial on there. So all of our products have a preservative in it, and you do an antimicrobial effectiveness test. So they will introduce a certain amount of bacteria, a known amount of bacteria at the beginning, and they'll say a standard for a particular preservative should be able to kill all of the bacteria that we introduce by day 4 or whatever. And then they retest the product, and that's how you prove, or it's 28 days. You prove that that bottle can withstand a particular, bacterial load.
Right.
And so all of that is done before you would even know that the product exists.
That's incredible. Yeah, I'm going to have to come there when they might not like me because I might put a camera in their face, but I want to film that whole aspect. That sounds, and it's really assuring too, because I think most people think you're just in your garage, not you literally, just as a figure of imagination. It's like, oh, you're just in your garage with some beakers and mixing around, slap a label on it and ship it to their door. But like, I don't know, to me, it just shows so much more of an appreciation to watch you do your art and to go through and to show what it actually looks like. I mean, I know I'm being over the top when I say in your garage with beakers, but like most people just don't understand what you have to go through to get that, cap kit in the mail. Yep. They just think, again, you just threw it in a jar and put a lid on it, slapped a label on it, shipped it to my door. And it's like, no, there was 600 steps that happened to make that come to fruition.
Yes, it is a lot of legwork. And when you think about, like, I'll call it the good old days, 10 years ago, the amount of extra steps and all the things that, and when we, products were great 10 years ago, and they've exponentially increased more of all of those things that we've already talked about that we have to do even more of now. So it's in fact, I had a veterinarian knew how many milligrams per mil, right, he was getting of a particular product. And he called me, he goes, so wait a minute, I did this at home. I took salt and I weighed out, 60 milligrams, times it by 30 mils. And that's a lot of solid to get to dissolve into a liquid, right? And that's part of the fun that we have when we're experimenting with new drugs is, in theory, if you looked up the chemical formula of a particular compound or drug, it'll tell you the solubility of how concentrated you can make that drug before it no longer stays in solution. And sometimes we're able to like double that. And so if you were at the pharmacy looking over my shoulder while we're compounding, you would look at this giant tray, weighboat of powder, and this little bit amount of, solvent or whatever it is. Well, there's no way that amount of drug is going to dissolve into that amount of liquid. And it does. And that's part of the science and part of doing this for so long that we're able to do that. And that to me is one of the fun parts.
Yeah, I might have to fly up there to watch that because that would be incredible.
Maybe we'll do something that's like teamed where you fly up, you get to see the pharmacy, and then we'll do kind of like I can see you flying a drone through the pharmacy or something.
No, for sure.
Pretty cool.
Then we'll go elk hunting.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So in the wildlife space specifically, what are, I don't know, a couple of the biggest challenges that you face as a pharmacist?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, it is, and we've talked about this, 1,000% it's the regulatory oversight. I think that's part of our success to this point is Dan's got this innate ability to always adapt. Part of why we went with a modular clean room, right? It's not built into the walls of the clean room. So if, let's say, a particular state comes up with a new rule and you got to have a secondary room for de-garbing, right? We have the ability to adapt to that. And if I look at where pharmacy was when I first graduated, I actually first started compounding in 2014 to where we are now, we've had to adapt a lot. And you adapt or you die. And so that is probably by far the biggest challenge is in making sure that we're always staying on top of it and we're always one step ahead of what's going to come down the pipe.
Right. And then what, my favorite question to ask anyone I have on, are what are some of the biggest misconceptions you have in your industry?
Yeah. So this one's kind of funny. I've talked to a lot of people that they just automatically think the pharmacy, a couple things. One, the pharmacy is almost like an enemy, like I hate talking to the pharmacy. They always asking me these ridiculous questions and I don't want to deal with them. It's just a pain. I'm on the phone for 45 minutes. And knowing that, to be honest with you, if I ask you what your date of birth is, it's not because I want to, maybe I will send you a birthday card, but it's because we're required to, and that changes so much. And so if we're bugging you as a pharmacy, it's not because we're purposely trying to make your life hard. We're just trying to comply with what's required and know that I can promise you we are doing everything we can on our end to make that whole process as smooth and as efficient for you as the end user. Because along with that one little requirement, there's 50 other things we're doing behind the scenes that you don't know about.
Right.
So I think changing that mentality and knowing that your pharmacy is here for you. Like that's literally why we're doing this. That's why we started this pharmacy, because we love this industry. We love building relationships with our clients. So we're here for you in all reality, because without you, we don't exist. And so we want you to be successful more than anything.
Right. So
we got to change the idea of a pharmacy that we are here for you. I want you to look forward to calling and talking to your pharmacist buddy, right? Even if it's not from us. There's a lot of great pharmacies out there. I think there's a couple that, we've even gotten to know, and they have, similar ideas, similar focuses, and they're great people. So find a pharmacy that you like, enjoy talking to them, and work with them.
Yeah, and then that would lead me to saying, like, what's one thing, if people have that misconception, what's one thing that you wish people understood about your side of the industry?
We've touched a lot of it, right? I think it's a culmination of all of these things, but for the most part, it's, we have a lot of challenges that we go through, and we do it all for the name of taking care of our clients and our patients. And that's what our passion is. And that's what we want to be here for. So,
yeah, well, if they can't tell, I can tell being in person of you care about what you're doing. You're not just doing it for a paycheck. We're all here to make money. Don't get me wrong. But ultimately, you can tell by the people we have in the chair around the office or on a job. You can tell if they're there just to get a paycheck or if they're there because they care. And so you can put Droptine's thumb of approval on there.
We appreciate that.
And so since y'all are a younger company and you're going through and starting it, where do you see the future for Capture Lab?
Trying to not be too bold, right? But I think you got to have lofty goals. Okay. If you're going to be a company and you're going to be competitive and you're going to do your industry a service, you got to have lofty goals. I would say we are going to do our best to become one of, if not the premier wildlife pharmacy in the chemical immobilization space. That's our main goal. So I hope that 2, 3, 4 years from now, when someone thinks of Capture Lab, they think of those are the immobilization guys, right? Yeah. Even if we don't buy their product, but if you got questions, you got some harebrained idea, that's the premier pharmacy that we see. And I say that very humbly, right? Because there's some, again, great pharmacies and people doing great things, but that's what we're going to shoot for.
Yeah.
And you know, I think again, that's necessary. I think as a client, if you're one of our customers, you want that. You don't want to deal with the pharmacy that's just okay with mediocre. You want the pharmacy that's out there to be the best. And that's our goal.
So I know these next couple questions I have, we're getting towards the end, but I'm going to go use the restroom because I know these next couple questions are about to be lengthy. All right, now we're back. Had to have a restroom break, but with what you're doing with Capture Labs and all the cool things you're doing, what are some upcoming like innovations, products, or changes that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so you know, we have our cap. That's kind of our base. We've just started field studies and starting to dispense some Cap K. We have Cap KM, so cap with ketamine and midazolam. And the idea with that is there's a lot of, in the intermittent absence of those ultra-potent opioids we talked about, veterinarians had to get really creative on what do we do in the interim? Like we still have to immobilize these animals. And they found some really interesting combinations of drugs. You know, a lot of it involves the Tilazol and combining that with a cap type product. And the problem is once you start mixing things, you know, consistency of stuff, or we start a whole different beyond use state technically.
Right.
So if we can find a way to mix that in the lab and have it already pre-ready for you, there's a lot of advantages to that. So I'm really excited to see how the Cap KM kind of comes to fruition. In fact, I joked with Dan that maybe if, you know, that's kind of our alpha dog, maybe we start calling that an alpha kit because you know, it's an alpha 2 drug. So it's kind of a play on words. So we'll see. I'm excited about that one. We have some other products that aren't immobilization drugs, a couple of which are designed for anti-parasite medications. And there, you know, we originally had some veterinarians approach us and say, hey, you know, currently what's available as a manufactured item really isn't conducive for treating a 700, 600 pound animal, right? The doses that we're giving are so high, we have to give multiple injections over multiple injection sites, and we have to immobilize the animal to do so. So one of those products is ivermectin. So we'll use ivermectin as an example. Anytime I've ever heard anybody talk about it or try to manipulate it, ivermectin at 1% concentration is relatively, it's viscous, right? So to utilize that for remote delivery through a dart, you can end up, the way it was described to me, sometimes you can get kind of a hydraulic effect where the actual administration of the drug can potentially be inconsistent because of the viscosity. The other issue is the amount of drug you need to dose a huge animal like that is so big it's not going to fit in a dart anyway. So we worked really hard and have developed an injectable ivermectin that goes anywhere from 2% to 10%. And I stopped at 10% because I didn't know the utility of continuing to experiment with a higher concentration. But
you think it could be more?
I probably could get it stronger. Yeah, you start losing some of the usability as far as if you had to dilute it or you had to. You definitely would never mix it with anything like this. This compounding process that we use to make it's only going to work for this drug. At the lower concentrations, we've been able to dilute it slightly in water. But if you read kind of the chemical formula of ivermectin, it'll straight up just say not water soluble, meaning it has to be in a non-aqueous solution. And so we've been able to manipulate that and get it in super high concentrations, but it's also roughly the viscosity of water. So the idea is we now have an ivermectin or an anti-parasite type drug that has the ability for remote delivery. You can draw up an exact amount. So whether you're top dressing feed or you're, you know, applying it topically or however, there's a lot of variability. You have a really strong dominant male that comes to the feed and they get a way bigger dose than the, you know, non-dominant female that's, you know, whatever that may be. Dosing can sometimes be inconsistent, or maybe you don't want to treat that animal. You have a very specific animal you're wanting to treat for a parasite infection. The ability to dart them without immobilizing them, we feel like has a lot of utility. And from the people that we've visited with thus far would also agree. The veterinarians that we've ran this idea by really were excited about the idea. So their explanation was a lot of times by the time you see an animal, they actually had a couple of them. So one, by the time you find an animal that you can visibly see has got a parasite infection, they're pretty weak, right? So there's a 50-50 chance they may not make it through the immobilization, not because of the drug or anything else. It's just stressful. And so they risk, if I treat this thing, it might die during the treatment, but if I don't treat it, it's really probably going to die. So they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
Right.
The other is, I've heard a lot of talks that specifically look at changing the way we approach kind of our parasite program or how we do that, where instead of blanket treating the entire herd, we're treating the specific animal that has the parasite infection. And we've been doing this on the human side for years. It's called antibiotic stewardship, right? We want to know specifically what they're susceptible to and what antibiotic is going to work, and that's exactly what we treat with. When we blanket give everybody penicillin, pretty soon penicillin doesn't work anymore.
Right.
And that's similar to what we're starting to see, in the veterinary world and in the parasite aspect. So if we can target a very specific animal with the appropriate dose and know they're getting the appropriate dose or within reason, I think it has the ability to really make an impact from that perspective.
And so before we started filming, I know we kind of were talking about some of these things. Well, I feel like I heard a year ago or whatever that they were blanketing statements saying ivermectin is not the cure. And then I think you said something that they just flipped it, right? Is that what I heard correctly? Or
yeah, so that's a good question. I think part of it depends on the parasite you're looking at. So a veterinarian is going to know way more about this than I will, but it's been explained to me that we'll use giraffes for an example. Many of the types of parasite infections they get, those parasites have basically become resistant to ivermectin. So we have to use a different option, right? So it really depends on the veterinarian's decision and expertise on choosing the correct parasite medication for whatever they think has infected that animal. So you are correct. There's probably instances in certain species where ivermectin isn't the best choice.
Right.
But in all reality, that was what we were approached with, with this idea. I'll be honest with you, ivermectin's the start. Like if it comes out that we get a new type of parasite that comes in and drug X works better than ivermectin, but we can't get drug X to do the same things that we want it to, chances are we can probably compound it to make it that way.
Really?
Yeah.
One outfit, one way of doing business. Arns Ranch and Wildlife runs cattle, manages native and exotic wildlife, and hunts with intention. From pasture gates to profit margins, they don't just manage your land, they elevate it. Contact Arns Ranch and Wildlife. They're built for ranchers and hunters that work. What's up, Droptine degenerates? Do you need a new website? Did this ad make you laugh? We're over here just trying to figure out what ads work and what's going to grab your attention. So if this made you laugh, comment below. And if you need a new website, head over to droptinestudios.com and we would be honored to build you a new website that's going to represent your business. So with that being said, is like you said, there's certain things that are becoming immune to ivermectin. And isn't there something that they just said about screwworms that they've made an emergency change for that?
Yeah. So my understanding, and again, it's been a little while since I've kind of double checked this, but originally dormectin was one of the drugs that they had approved for use in New World screwworm. And I believe the FDA has given another emergency approval for ivermectin. So as a compounding pharmacy, we never make any kind of claims that our specific compound treats a specific, disease state or whatever. But if the veterinarian wants to prescribe as such, that's absolutely within their realm to do so. And so a lot of the feedback we've been given from veterinarians that have spent some time in South America and been places where New World screwworm is relatively prevalent, certain veterinarians on certain species seem to choose that as an option. Now, we'll have to see what drug over time begins to work the best and is more effective. And ultimately, that's the expertise of the veterinarians. The joke is an MD, like on the human side, really stands for my decision. And I think it's the same way with DVM. Like it ultimately is their choice. It's their expertise. But, if a veterinarian approached me and said, hey, this is the drug I want to use for New World screwworm, at the point where we are with, the emergency level of things, and, we're a compounding pharmacy. We're not a manufacturer. We don't have the same labeling that a manufactured item has as far as use and this is a whole nother podcast about GFI 256 and food producing animals and the rules behind that. But, we're we're a compounding pharmacy. If a doctor wants a particular type of drug and we go through all the steps to make sure that regulatory wise we can make just about anything. But originally we started with ivermectin because that's a big challenge. It's so difficult to compound and make it into a injectable type formulation, and we were able to do it.
Yeah. Well, I know we'll end it. We're going to get to our closing ones, but if someone only listened for that aspect, if they wanted to talk to you about it, because I know a lot of ranchers are extremely scared with this New World screwworm coming in. Do you want to give them your information so they know how to contact you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm old school, right? So I like talking to people on the phone. The phone number is 307-243-1977. But if you're busy and you prefer email, you go to our website. It's capturelabrx.com. And then we have a link to do emails and those types of things. So there's a lot of ways to get a hold of us. And I would say if specifically with the New World screwworm, talk to your vet first, see what they think, right? And if the veterinarian says, yeah, I mean, you might as well, at the point where they are infected with New World screwworm, what are we going to, right now no one's tested it. No one's tried things. So there's a lot of unknown. And I think your veterinarian is the first place to start.
Absolutely. Well, kind of getting to the closing points for someone listening who may need your services or want to learn more. You just gave that information, but after they talk to their vet, I know you said you like to talk. So I want to make sure that they know, like, you're willing to talk to them if they call.
100%. There's days where I feel like I spend probably 4 hours on the phone, but I love it because, I mean, this part, interacting with you, being with our community, again, we were kind of always the pharmacists behind the scenes, and I didn't like that. I loved talking to clients and building relationships with them. So, and you don't have to buy our products. If you just want to know about general pharmacy and you have pharmacy questions, I'll talk to you. I will answer any question you can to the best of my ability, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, those conversations evolve into something good, either for our pharmacy or for that individual patient, and we're bettering the community. And as long as that's kind of an end result, I'm okay with that.
Well, and that's why I kind of worded it that way, is I feel like a lot of people make those claims like, yeah, call me anytime, and then you can't get a hold of them for 6 months. And so I can tell that you actually want to better the industry, and which is really, I like that you threw that in there. It's like, you don't have to buy my product, just call. I'll be able to talk to you if you want.
Yeah, I will tell you, I have one time that I can think of thus far where someone's had a question about a reversal agent or whatever and called me after hours, and my phone was on vibrate and I felt so bad, and it took me about a half hour to call him back. But for the most part, we're very responsive. I would say the email part, I sometimes will forget to check that second inbox. But the first time you do, I'll give you my personal email, and you can email that way if it makes sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Communication is key to me, whether it's in business or relationship, whatever. And that's why even here, I'll try to forward my calls. I'll try to reply if I can. I'll be like, hey, I'm in a podcast. Hey, I'm on the phone, but give me a minute. I'll call you right back. But that way people know, like, I'm not just ignoring you. I'm doing something else. But yeah, there's definitely times where I feel like 90% of the days I go home and my wife's like, how was it? I was like, I was on the phone all day, which is good though. Right. We have to have those conversations to be able to make what we do work.
Well, and if I'm in the hood, I can't call. I look like my kids joke, or not my kids, my wife jokes that I look like Breaking Bad because I'm in there in my full suit and the mask and everything. So I can't talk on the phone when I'm there. But when I get out, I'll do my best to answer. And Dan is also a great resource, especially if you have regulatory questions. I can answer 90% of them, but then at a certain point I go, you know what? Let me let you talk to the expert. And you can talk to Dan because he's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up because I had tried my hardest not to bring up a Breaking Bad reference in here with you cooking in there. But yeah, to kind of sum things up, I wanted to see, is there anything that we didn't cover today or anything that you feel like is important people in this industry need to hear?
I feel like we did a pretty good job of covering a lot of the topics. We've been in this industry for a while. We're starting our new pharmacy, and I think if I did anything, I would take this opportunity just to thank the people that have been with us from day one, and the support that we've gotten from our community. It's humbling. As somebody that puts a lot of faith in God as to what we do and the process of doing this was a huge leap, a huge journey. Because as a person, you want to support your family, and all of a sudden that source of income is gone, and you're spending a lot of money and not making any. And It's a big leap of faith. And there are so many individuals from the veterinary side, the research side, some of those ranchers that we talked about that we have conversations with or email. Sometimes just their interest and their support and their excitement about what we're doing is, again, motivation to keep going. And so from the bottom of my heart and Dan's heart, we thank everyone that has helped us get to this point.
Absolutely. Well, man, I am so glad and humbled that you would take the time to come on our podcast and share your story and share what y'all are doing.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for having us. It's been an amazing experience.
Absolutely. Well, I think everybody's going to get some great knowledge and wisdom through this, and you'll watch this after, but we'll see everyone at EWA.
Sounds good. See you there.